Chapter 1. Being the cavalry officer's time of training at Fernandez Court and the introduction of several companions and potential rivals. At first glance, your new lodging is hardly suitable for a man of noble birth. The chamber in which you will be sleeping for the duration of your training is a cramped and dusty affair, poorly lit and heavily built. The low, vaulted ceiling is just battered and worn enough to remind you of a prison cell. The acrid reek of old gunpowder clings to every surface. You get the distinct impression that your new bunk room used to be some sort of powder magazine. The room itself is sparsely furnished, possessing naught but three narrow cots arranged along the walls with a table and chairs in the center. At the table sits a slim, large-nosed boy of about 16, his light brown hair tied back into a long queue. He wears a shirt of cream-colored silk with silver lion heads embroidered tastefully on the rolled-up sleeves. The green-grey jacket of a Royal Dragoon officer hangs carefully folded from the back of his chair. He nods at you coldly as you enter, barely paying you any mind. His attention is firmly affixed to the flintlock pistol in his hands. You watch for a few moments as he works over the delicate steel lock mechanism with an oiled cloth, practiced hands polishing each crevice and hinge with well-practiced ease. A full minute passes before the boy stops and sets the pistol down, apparently finished. He looks up, his eyebrows furrowed in annoyance. "Oh, hello." His voice is hard and flat. "Who are you?" "I will not take such rudeness from you." "Yeah, I'm Cornet Castleton, your new roommate." The boy sits back, his mouth set in a grim line. There is silence for a moment. He looks at you with some annoyance, as if you had failed some secret test of character he had set for you. "How wonderful for you," he says sarcastically. He introduces himself bluntly. "Caius del Casarosta. Was there anything else?" Wait for him to apologize for his crudeness. The boy nods curtly and seems to grudgingly accept your apology. "See that it doesn't happen again. We're all gentlemen here, so I must assume you come from a background of some refinement. I would not consider it too much of a strain for you to act like it." With that, the boy returns the now clean pistol to its holster at his belt, before pulling out a second and beginning to work it over with the same air of detached sang-froid he had displayed before. The door swings open again. A small, pale boy in his late teens strides through. His sandy blonde hair is disheveled and his alabaster skin covered with bruises and scrapes, some half-healed and some fresh. He is filthy all over. Dirt and sweat are heavily smeared over his fine features. The stink of leather and horse manure trails behind him as he makes his way to the far bunk. He takes one glance at you and Casarosta, still in mid-handshake, and shakes his head with disgust. Casarosta gives a cold chuckle. "That would be Elson, Lord Davis Dal Elson, first son to the Baron of Hawthorne," he says, just loud enough for the other boy to hear. "Associate with him as you would like, but do not expect me to weep with you should your poor idiot friend get himself killed." What a nice fellow. Elson lays down on his cot and makes a conscious effort to ignore the two of you. He fishes out a small, well-worn book from the pocket of his trousers and begins to read. You realize that now would be a good time to try to get to know your roommates, although Elson is now, at least pretending to be, fully engrossed by his book, and you still have Casarosta's full attention and perhaps his friendship. Do you... Well, if you want to be friendly with him, we gotta ask him about himself. That's how people like that work. At first, Casarosta is unwilling to answer any of your questions. It takes a few minutes of sly prodding on your part for the facts of his life to come out. First in a trickle, then in a torrent. It turns out that he is the bastard son of the Countess of Leoniscourt, brought up as a ward of her husband, the Earl of Leoniscourt. In his own prickly manner, he describes the circumstances of his birth, of how he was discovered to be deaf-born, a child of Bane-blooded line unable to sense or manipulate the Bane. As the deaf-born were always the result of the union between Bane-blood and Baneless, or commoner, Casarosta's deaf-born state betrayed his illegitimacy and led his mother to be executed for adultery as per the king's law. Despite his harsh infancy, he speaks kindly of his adoptive father, the Earl of Leoniscourt. His voice softens and he almost seems emotional when he describes how the Earl raised him as if he were his own son and let him take the name which would have been his birthright had he been legitimate. "He let me take his name. Out of all the things he could give me, he gave me the most precious, the only thing I could keep. So here I am, a bastard boy with a noble's name." He gives a stern grimace. "Which is probably why Elson doesn't seem to like me. In the eyes of Bane-blooded society, you're fraternizing below your station. Are you not?" Well, I can ask him about all the other things as well, so I might as well. Kazarost explains that Elson's upbringing gave him little time to practice horsemanship. Elson was given the frivolous education of an idle gentleman. He can recount histories and fairy stories beyond number, but he has very little practical ability or intelligence. After all, instead of finding something he was good at and excelling there, he insists on forcing himself to become a competent equestrian or die horribly in the attempt. About the book, Kazarost explains with a snort of derision that the book which Elson is reading happens to be Gallowbrook's Histories of the Knightly Orders Militant, a rather condensed tome of popular history. He wanted to be a Knight of the Red, he explains in his customarily matter-of-fact tone, as if that explained everything. After a short pause and the obvious fact that it did not, he continued in a wintry voice. "Elson's family is too poor to afford bane-hardened armor and sword, and too proud to enter the sun as a mere seeker in the hopes that he would rise to the spurs. Instead, they sent him off to the army, hoping he would get himself killed in a way that doesn't disgrace them entirely." Yep, I excuse myself and get some sleep before tomorrow's training. You dress for bed and lay yourself down on a thin, lumpy mattress. The blankets are made of uniformly grey and rough wool, but serve well enough. The lumpy cot takes some getting used to, but it's your wandering thoughts which keep you awake. You wonder what the coming days and years will bring, and whether you will ever get used to sleeping away from the cozy comfort of your own bedroom back at home. Finally, your mind becomes too weary to continue and meanders no more. You fall into a deep, dreamless sleep. You are hurled awake by a sharp knock on the door. Still groggy, you rise to the pale blue light of the early morning. A brawny, stoic man wearing the 3 chevrons of a sergeant hands you your saddle, sabre, a pair of pistols, and other various accoutrements. He leaves with a salute and a reminder that réveillé is in 10 minutes. I'm just going to pronounce it French because it's a French word. I don't know if it has an English pronunciation as well. You quickly familiarize yourself with the basic accoutrement. That could be French as well. You know what? Accoutrements of the dragoon's uniform as you dress in the early morning light. White shirt and underpants, breeches, cravats, and the regimental tunic. A knee-length, double-breasted affair colored a drab green-grey safe for a bright panel of blood red in the front. Your trousers are in the same green-grey as your tunic, but the belts for your pistols and sabre and your high-topped riding boots are made from dark leather, tastefully accented with silvered fittings. Your leather cavalryman's helmet would be similarly subdued if not for the 2 great plumes set in its crown, in the red and white of the Duke of Cuneris, your regiment's commanding officer. Put together, the whole ensemble is still rather drab compared to the uniforms of more prestigious regiments, or even the burnt orange of the Terran regiments of foot. Regardless, your uniform fits rather well, though a few folds hang a little too loose or cinch a little too tight. Thus prepared, you head down to the parade grounds to report for your first day of training. The next few weeks are a blur to you. The King's army requires no formal instruction of its officers, as gentlemen of the blood are expected to have a natural aptitude for command. However, Duke of Cuneris, having made the decision not to entrust the fates of men under his command to the vague advantages of noble birth, has seen fit to provide you and your fellow new cornets with an improvised training course anyways. Thus, your mornings are spent in a maelstrom of leather, steel, and horseflesh. Red-faced sergeants and stern grooms teach you the rudimentary skills required of a cavalryman in His Majesty's service. You are drilled relentlessly on your horsemanship, your physical endurance, and your skills with sabre and carbine. On the very first day, you are put through a massive set of drills and maneuvers, the so-called Manual of Arms. Slowly and carefully, and then with increasing rapidity, you are made to repeat the simple actions of mounting a horse, dismounting, loading your weapon, presenting arms, shouldering arms, and practicing the more than 24 valid strokes of the sabre for hours on end. It is clear the instructors mean for you to repeat the actions until you no longer need to think to carry them out. From sunrise to noon, you are atop a saddle, drilling with the rest of the squadron, or kneeling in the firing range. How well do you do? I breeze through physical training effortlessly. Soldiering is second nature to you. Other recruits cower before your skills with a wooden saber, and your marksmanship ratings are consistently near the top of the scale. Even some of the drill sergeants are impressed. Casarosta appears to be your only real better when it comes to the art of personal combat. He always seems to be making progress just a little faster than you. Thankfully, he is civil about it. He does not gloat when his musketry scores are a few points above yours. He does not flaunt his superior horsemanship, but then again, nor does he compliment you in any way. Regardless, nobody else can match the two of you, and the supposed rivalry between the two best riders and fighters in the training groups quickly becomes the stuff of frequent discussion. Drilling and physical training mercifully ends at noon, just as the days get to their hottest. Within the cool stone walls of the old fortress, you eat simple but hearty fare with the other junior officers before being shuffled off for instruction in more academic pursuits. Some of the barracks rooms of the old fortress have been converted to classrooms, and throughout the afternoon knowledgeable lieutenants and captains run you through the rudiments of tactics and command. Military history, geography, mathematics, and more esoteric subjects are all covered thoroughly. You also learn how to maintain your equipment and weapons properly. For example, the spiral grooves of your rifled carbine are easily fouled and require constant maintenance. You are taught how each man must wrap a cloth patch greased with pig's fat around each carbine ball when firing, so that it may grip the rifling without fouling it. Your instructors pound this and 1,000 other scraps of information about every single piece of your gear into your head, promising you that eventually such comprehensive knowledge of your own equipment will find a way to save your life. How do you fare? Ah, I see what you did there. Okay, there are apparently, I assume 3 different skills you get, and you can only choose each option. You can only choose each option once. You can be very good at one thing, alright at another, and pretty bad at a third thing. And we, not knowing that, obviously, chose to be very good at our first thing. Now then, book smarts. Alright, I don't know what the third thing will be, but book learning is a great weakness of mine. Let's go with that. Sadly, you do not seem to be very good with academic subjects. You rarely grasp even the basics of a lesson, and your instructors are soon frustrated beyond words with you. Despite your lack of talent, you manage to muddle through, eventually squeaking out a bare pass. When your academic lessons end at 6 o'clock, you are set at liberty for the remainder of the day. Most of the other officers in training gravitate to the officers' mess to eat their supper amongst their peers and superiors. This is the prime time for gossip, debate, and other such social pursuits. In a group of young gentlemen of good family and fine education, conversation naturally commits itself to wider subjects than the common barracks room chatter about training, harvests, and girls. Are there even any girls in these armies? We'll find out, I guess. Political debates are common, and it is not an especially rare sight to see 2 officers pitched against each other. Waxing rhetorical over the pros and cons of some act of the quarters printed in that day's broadsheet. Skill and physical prowess may rule the day, but wit and likability carry the evening. One could almost tell the popularity of an officer solely by the amount of comrades clustered around him. What about you? How do you usually take supper? Yep, 1 option left. I may not be the most personable of men, but I rarely eat alone. Alright, I'm happy with my choices, even if I wasn't aware I was taking them at the first one. Although you're not excessively popular, you still manage to make some friends. You're certainly welcome at almost any table you choose to eat at. Rarely are you ever refused a chance to speak. By the second week of your training, you come to the realization that you have never seen Casarosta at supper. While some officers certainly do avoid the evening meal to avail themselves of the pleasures of the town, you doubt that your ascetic roommate would be so morally lax. One evening you resolve to make a particular effort to look for him in the officer's mess, but see that he is quite conspicuously absent. Yeah, we're definitely looking for him. As soon as you finish your supper, you decide to look for your erstwhile roommate. After first ensuring that he is neither in his room nor in any of the other common areas of the fortress, you make the rounds of the massive old stone building. After half an hour, you finally find him in Fernandez Court's small, dimly lit chapel. He is kneeling before the small, centuries-old statue of St. Talbot and silently tending to the shrine flame of the patron saint of House Casarosta, his lips fluttering open and shut in quick, repetitive prayer. Unable to break the holy silence of the chapel or meet the gaze of the hundreds of statues of the other saints arrayed around the room, you quietly leave the small chamber of worship. Throughout your instruction, you often find yourself training alongside or against your roommates. Casarosta has proven himself an excellent horseman and a first-class carabinier, while Elson seems to always be surrounded by other nobles' sons. Their mutual rivalry remains strong, and the two will never speak to each other unless absolutely necessary. Regardless, after supper you find yourself at liberty to further a prospective friendship with Eva. What do you do? Is reconciling them going to work? We barely know the two of them. But sure. Despite your noble attempts, neither boy seems quite in favor of speaking to the other on anything but purely hostile terms. You get the feeling that your attempts at reconciling them are starting to grate on them both. Finally, after 2 uneasy weeks, Elson politely takes you aside to advise you to stop wasting your time. One morning, halfway through the 6th week of training, you arrive on the parade grounds to see your instructors notably absent. Your fellow officers in training are milling about aimlessly. After a few minutes, Captain Montes himself comes out, his pinched face even more wrinkled in anxiety than usual. He announces that His Majesty the King has finally given orders for the Royal Dragoons to join the rest of the army. A squadron of warships is to arrive within the week to ferry you across the Caligine Sea. Before then, there is to be a final exercise, a mock charge across an open pasture with live steel and ammunition. Every newly commissioned officer is to participate. Leading such an exercise would be a great honor for any cornet. More importantly, it would mean that they would have a chance at a brevet promotion? What are all these French words? Should they acquit themselves well enough to be considered suitable for a position of high responsibility. The crowd is rapt as Montes announces the name of the man to lead the exercise, Cornet Caius del Casarosta. You depart the parade grounds, following the buzzing crowd of subalterns to the mess for breakfast. Training officially ends the next day. After that, the old fortress seems even more abuzz with activity. The enlisted men are conscripted into stacking crates of ammunition, supplies, and rations for men and horse alike in preparation for the convoy's arrival. You and the other cornets are briefed on the nature of the exercise you are to take part in. The mock charge will involve all of the new officers and nearly the full strength of the regiment. In attendance will be the regimental commander, His Grace the Duke of Cunaris. Montes does not hesitate to stress how important the exercise would be. While the dragoons are not meant for frontal charges, this exercise would be the dragoons' last and only attempt at maneuvering as a whole regiment before departing for Antar, when the next such maneuver could be into the teeth of a row of enemy muskets or pikes. The day of the exercise dawns bright and cloudless. The regiment forms up squadron by squadron on the parade grounds, before marching to the starting point in a vast field outside the fortress walls. By the time the sun is high in the sky, all 6 squadrons of the regiment have assembled. Your first view of the entire assembled regiment is breathtaking. Over 1,000 men atop their horses, wearing the green-grey and blood-red of their long uniform jackets. Casarosta is visible, barely, at the head of your squadron. In one hand he holds the regimental colours, in the other his sabre shines in the morning sun like a sliver of light. Casarosta slowly moves ahead of the assembled regiment, his horse at a slow walk. You take your position behind him. You take note that Elson is near the rear, which, considering his terrible horsemanship, was probably a dose of sound judgment on his part. The field is silent as all 6 squadrons of the Royal Dragoon Regiment sit atop their saddles, straining to hold back their anticipation to a man. From each assembled troop, a sergeant walks his horse forward. Each senior enlisted man wheels his force around, staring men and officers in the face. "Who are we?" the NCOs bellow in unison. "The first to fight," comes the automatic reply, made a solid mass of sound by 1,000 voices. It's a response drilled into every single dragoon since their first day. "Who are we?" "The last to leave." The shouted response comes even louder. "Who are we?" The first a horse! Who are we? The last a bed! Who are we? You can feel the air course with anticipation as men and officers tremble with enthusiasm. Royal Dragoons! Who are we? Royal Dragoons! Who are we? The surgeons scream, their voices hoarse with exertion. Dragoons! Dragoons! The King's Dragoons! The reply is deafening, and you hear your own voice being added to the chant despite yourself. Dragoons! Draw! Swords! The regiment draws their sabres as a single body. You snap your head to face front just in time to see Kazarosta give the signal to charge with the traditional battle cry of the Royal Army. Jera and victory! Advance! The regiment flows into motion as a trumpet blasts and kettle drums pound your ears. Soon the cacophony is joined by the thunderous beats of 5,000 hoofs on the grassy turf as the regiment eases into a trot, a canter, and finally a full run. The ground seems to shake under you as your horse pounds down the field in the company of 1,000 others. Wild whoops and shouts fill the air as the entire regiment picks up speed. In the corner of your eye you can see the fluttering red dragon on white of the Duke of Cuneris observing from specially built stands on the side. You spur your horse onwards as you lean forward in the saddle, the reins clutched tightly in your hands. With the exhilarating feel of the wind rushing through your hair, it is hard to remember to turn to check your flanks as you rapidly approach the line of straw dummies serving as your enemy. As you do, you notice Alson almost beside you, his horse straining to push its rival yet further forward. Did he speed up to try to reach the forefront of the charge? From the corner of your eye you see a flash of motion. Alson tumbles from his seat, wrenched free from the saddle by the wild momentum of his mount. A fraction of a second is all it takes. It seems like half the squadron turns their heads at his frantic screaming, punctuated by sickening thumps as his careening horse flings his body behind it like a rag doll. You look ahead for orders to stop the exercise, but out of either callousness or complete obliviousness, Kazarosta continues on. No order to stop is given. Alson's panicked screams terminate with a sharp, sickening crack. As you turn your head, you see him being dragged along, entirely limp, his other foot still in the stirrup. You make a split-second decision to... what are we gonna do? Go on. You jab your spurs into your mount's flanks more savagely than you ever have before to catch up with the leading edge of the formation. Slowly pulling alongside Kazarosta's own horse, you scream at him to stop. He looks at you for a moment and snaps his head back forward as if he had not heard you. It is not until you make a move to grab his reins that he grits his teeth and raises the standard in his hand, giving the signal to stop. The surgeons are able to get to Alson quickly thanks to your prompt intervention. He has suffered immense injury, but due to the quick response, he is conscious and in his own bed again by the time you return. Atop your own cot lies a note written in Alson's own fine handwriting. Some of the lads told me it was you who got me to heal us in time. Thank you. D.E. Kazarosta, however, is less forgiving. Your disruption of the entire exercise and his inability to handle the situation promptly means that Montes sees no reason to consider him for promotion. He blames you for the loss of his golden opportunity and refuses to speak to you for the next 2 days. A few days later, you wake to the steady roll of a kettle drum. Dressed and equipped, you step out onto the open seaside parapet to behold the lean, dark forms of half a dozen warships, each flying the Tower and Griffin of the Royal Terran Navy. The parade grounds are full of horses, men and equipment being loaded onto boats for the short trip over the water to the waiting ships. You are ordered to gather up your pack and join your squadron in preparation for the same. You are taken aboard one of the boats with a dozen other men of your squadron. The trip to your transport is slow, but the wind is relatively light and the receding tide helps you on your way out. The warship assigned to carry you to Antar is the HMS Victorious, a predatory-looking frigate of 44 guns. The captain is a thin, balding Aetorian named Walken. He welcomes you aboard with a short, perfunctory speech, and his petty officers assign you quarters. As an officer, you are allowed the privilege of sharing a small quarterdeck cabin with Alson and Kazarosta, as opposed to the gun deck hammocks to which the enlisted men will be relegated. The ship's bell rings just as the three of you arrive in your new temporary quarters. The deck above your heads reverberates with the rhythm of bare feet on wood. You hear the captain's muffled voice giving orders to cast off. You come back on deck in time to see the Victorious' sails unfurl. All along the coast, the ships of your convoy cast off in an attempt to make it into the open sea before the tide turns against them. You watch from the quarterdeck as the Victorious takes its position at the rear of the column, and she takes you away from the receding coast of Tierra and off to war. Next chapter. Progress saved. Should you die in the next chapter, you may return to this point in time. Yeah. Alright, so in the future, I think, because I'm going to end it here for now, in the future, I think we should end it before we click next chapter. But, well, we're just going to have to not die in the next chapter. Before we end it, let's have a quick look at our stats. 18, rank cornet, wealth 60, income 5. Soldiering, pretty good. Charisma, alright. Intellect, what's that? Reputation, could be better. Health, pretty good. More ideal than cynical. And none in the way of ruthlessness or mercy. Reference? Interesting. We might look through this eventually. This is quite a lot. Personages of importance. There's not a lot of them. There's me. Not me. There's Caius. There's Sir Johannes Dahl Findlay, Duke of Cunaris. There's Lord Davis Dahl Elson. Okay. Sir Alfred Dahl Montes and His Tierran Majesty King Miguel I of House Rendower. Okay. Glossary of terms. Yeah, this is quite long as well. It's not that bad actually. Alright. Return to the game. And yep, that is going to be it for... I guess this will definitely have been 2 parts. I don't know how I'm going to cut them up yet, but you'll have seen. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed it. Please tell me if I pronounce any words obviously wrong, because, well, I'm not a native speaker and some words I just haven't seen before, so it's hard to pronounce them correctly. And yeah, I hope to see you guys next time. Bye.